usually just have one. The first talk is by Sharon Taylor. She is a Gold Star mother, and she's from Henderson, and she's the president of the Gold Star Mothers in the United States. We arranged this talk. She talked for the honor flight about a year ago, and I heard her, and she did an excellent job. The only problem is she doesn't answer her phone, she doesn't answer email, and she's not here. That is a problem. So, we're going to give you a little summary of Gold Star Mothers and the Gold Star. And then, that's just going to be 2 or 3 slides. Then we have Jason Holmes, who has given this talk on Battle of Britain for the last 40 years, about 100 times. So he's going to talk about the Battle of Britain. I'm sorry about the change, but that's all we can do for right now. This is a video of a 2022 Gold Star mother. So it just starts a preface of what's going on. Let's see if I can get this baby going. To tell you what a Gold Star mother is, you really don't want to be one. A Gold Star mother is, and I can't get this video to work, maybe somebody with some technological expertise, but this is a Gold Star being raised at this lady's house by some volunteers. And I have a Gold Star here, and this Gold Star is what is hanging in front of James Bethel Gresham's house. Started in 1917. The first Gold Star ever given to anybody in the United States is in World War I. So James Bethel Gresham from Evansville, Indiana, was one of the first ever to receive a Gold Star. We didn't do that in the War of 1898 or the Civil War or Revolutionary War. So this star that's hanging in the World War I room is what was hanging in his mother's house. And my grandmother had one of these hanging in World War II because she lost her son. And we can talk about numbers, talk about everything, but my grandmother never got over it. I'm sure Mrs. Gresham never got over it, and I'm sure if it's happened to one of you, you never got over it. Some of you have had some losses in the family. Okay, now what do you qualify to be a Gold Star person? To lose a family member in the war, you're allowed to put that flag in your house. They've given in 1948 a lapel, or 1946, mothers and wives a little lapel that they can wear on their blouse. But those are the main things. Gold Star Day started in, I would give up on it, John. We're going to get Caleb to put the world map on of Europe if he has it. I'll put, yeah. Okay, just hook that one up. That's perfect. Just hook that up to Europe. Gold Star, there are 3 major days. 1936, it was called Gold Star Mother's Day and Family Day. That was 1936, and it's I think it's the last Sunday in September every year. Then in April, they changed it to made a Spouse Day, April 5th, so it was just about a week or 2 or 3 weeks ago. So the lady was going to talk about this, but we'll have her talk another time. I'm sorry about the change. Now, we have a picture of Europe up here, and Jason Holmes is a university professor at Vincennes University. He's going to talk about Midway, and he's got a pointer here. We have a economic pointer, somebody's cane, but you got to stay with him. He's a pretty fast talker, and he likes to do this in an hour, and I've given him 37 minutes. That's all he has. So here he comes, Jason Holmes.
Well, my name is Jason Holmes, and I do talk fast in 2 inches. All right, well, there you go. All right, I'm kind of a substitute here, but I'll do my best. And so I'll try to tell you a little bit about the Battle of Britain. I'm sure you've all heard the quote. I'm sure you all heard the quote, never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few. All right, so really that's the gist of my talk. And I'm going to skip a lot of it, just because it's only giving me a short period of time.
You've got to be 2 inches in the microphone.
I cannot hear you. Oh my God. Pick it up. Turn the hearing aids up, Doc. Straight into the mouth. I got it. All right, here we go. And so the background on this, we're lucky. We've had speakers talk about the leading up to the Battle of Britain. We've talked about early on Hitler came to power in 1933. One of the books I read on the Battle of Britain said, you know, when the Wright brothers flew the first plane, that was the start of the Battle of Britain. Well, I don't really go there. But I will go to the point that I think as soon as Hitler ascended to power, that the Battle of Britain became inevitable. It was going to happen. All right. Mein Kampf, he talks about the need for expanding the borders of the Aryan race. So yeah, it started, had its genesis right there when he took off. 1935, he made his first aggressive move. He marched into what's called the Rhineland. Oh, lost my Jesus, it's a good day. He marched into the Rhineland, which is an area right just between France and Germany. If they would have responded, they being Europe, would have responded with some kind of aggression, I think Hitler would have folded the tent and ran, and we probably would have avoided the severity of the war that we had. But that didn't happen. The next thing he did, he marched into Austria, his native homeland. He was greeted as a conquering hero. Had he died at that particular moment, he probably would have gone down in history as probably the greatest military and political leader ever in the history of Germany. Alexander the Great and Bismarck and that sort of thing. Unfortunately for the world, he didn't die. The next thing he did, he held the Munich Conference. That's the one where he gave away part of Czechoslovakia. We've talked about that before in here. And that famous photo op where Chamberlain comes in, gets off the plane waving that piece of paper, this piece of our time. And I'm sure most of you remember seeing that. Well, maybe the worst thing he could have ever done was to wave that. But I'm going to jump to his defense just a little bit here. By doing that, he knew how bad a shape the British Army was in. Now, the Navy was pretty good, but the Army was horrible. They hadn't done anything since the First World War. So they were ill prepared for battle. He bought them a year. He also, about 6 months before that, had ordered the building of the Spitfire and the Hurricane to go into war production. And so the Spitfire took a little longer to get going than the Hurricane because he had some issues with the airframe. But people ask me how many developed. The easiest way, I don't try to get into numbers too much, but for every 5 aircrafts that were built, fighters that were built, 3 would be Hurricanes and 2 would be Spitfire. So that kind of gives you the ratio there of what they did. The guy that was in charge of the air defense, was a guy named Hugh Dowding, was the perfect guy for that. He is a guy with no personality. I mean, he was probably as dry a human being as ever lived. Had very few friends, but he was the guy they needed for that. He told Churchill that he needed 53 squadrons in order to defend the homeland, and they were able to do that. They were able to produce enough Hurricanes and enough Spitfires to produce. And a squadron consists of about 16 aircraft, 28 pilots, and then, of course, support ground crews. Now, I'm going to jump back in history here a little bit. All right, in 1935, and this is a true story, the British government put out a notice saying that if anybody could develop a death ray, that they would give them a huge monetary reward. Somewhere they got the idea that the Germans had developed a death ray. Now this is Buck Rogers through and through. There was a guy now had the name of Robert Watson Watt, who was from Cambridge University. He was a professor there, physics, and he came and he took up the challenge. Within 3 days, he came back to the Parliament and he says, this is theoretically impossible. There is no such thing as a death ray, all right? But he says, what I can do for you is develop radar defense, an early radar defense mechanism. And it was kind of known as chain Holmes. And he and a group of his people from Cambridge started working on this. Now, they took up residence in South England and basically a shack, and that's really what it was. And they worked there for about a year. They were heavily funded, and after a year, Downing and some of the members of Parliament said, we'd like a demonstration. Well, it couldn't have gone any worse. What was supposed to happen was a plane was supposed to come in off the English Channel. They were supposed to tell him when this plane was coming, at what height, and when it was going to arrive over our head. And the first time anybody heard this plane was when it buzzed the building they were in. So all of the Parliament went back there thinking we spent money for a year for really no good reason, but luckily, Dowding, who was a visionary, he said, I'll continue to fund this, but we're going to have results. So they moved out of this little shack, they moved into it's kind of a rundown estate. He brought in more scientists, and slowly but surely they started to develop what became known as chain home. Chain home was a series of high, like the 350-foot towers that started from the Isle of Wight down in the very southern tip. There was 22 of them, and they went all the way up from the very southern tip right here, all the way up to Scotland. And they could project out over 100 miles. Now what this did, this allowed them to have an early warning system so that they would not continuously have to have fighter aircraft in the air looking for the Germans. Now the Germans by this time had conquered Poland. A major thing that happened when they conquered Poland, the British government, right before they fell, they ordered all the pilots to make whatever provisions they could to get out of the country and try to make their way to England. And I'll tell you in a minute why that became such a major factor. All right? And so Poland fell within 30 days. Then we went through what was called the Phony War. We talked about that in here, one of the guys. Well, nothing really happened through the winter of 1939, early 1940 until the spring. And that's when the Germans overran Norway, Belgium, Holland, and then pushed the British Expeditionary Force and the French back to Dunkirk. And then we had the miracle of Dunkirk. So now we're ready, now we're up to the point where the Battle of Britain is ready to commence. But I want to drop back to 1935 again. After that death ray episode, and after they started developing, what they did, they built these series of these big high towers. Well, the Germans could see them from France, and they were wondering what these things were. Well, they did it. They let it out through their double agents that they were nothing more than radio directional finders. And so there was a general in the Abwehr, which is the secret service of the Germans, and this is really his name. His name is Wolfgang Martini. Wolfgang said that he would try to figure out what these towers really were. So what he did in 1937, if you remember in May of 1937, the Hindenburg crash in Lakehurst, New Jersey, that stopped all air travel by commercial travel overnight. But what was going on, the Germans had built even a bigger Zeppelin that was back in a hangar ready to be put into service. But once that stopped, there it was. You talk about a big wide open, it was just sitting there. So Wolfgang Martini asked Canaris, who's head of the Abwehr, if he could have it. And he said, I've got a plan for this. He says, I'm going to put the most latest technology in that thing, get the best technicians I can find, and I'm going to fly around, and it'll be a covert activity. I will basically use it for a spy plane, or a spy Zeppelin. They used it first in Czechoslovakia. They used it also before war broke out into Poland. And then right before hostilities broke out, just before September of 1939, they flew it over England. Now, by this time, chain home was in use. It was in active use. And the brilliance of chain home was this: that what Watts did, he tied the power source for chain homes into the national grid. And he also, by doing this, had a constant power source. He also had all the different towers report to Central Command, and that's where Dowding's headquarters was, right outside of London. So they had a centralized command to direct the fighter command. Well, what they did with the Zeppelin was they flew over and they saw it coming. So all of a sudden they start to scramble the planes to meet this Zeppelin. Well, someone spots it and says, no, this is not a group of fighters coming in. This is nothing but a big Zeppelin. So they stand down the fighters, so not to give away the fact that they had an early warning system. And they allow this Zeppelin to go from the very southern tip of England all the way up to Scotland, mapping what the installations were. But here's the deal. Inside that Zeppelin, they had this latest technology where they could listen to what they thought was the radar. And German radar, here, they were used to radar. German radar actually worked on 500 cycles a second. So if you heard German radar, it would sound like click, click, click. No, I lied. It would sound like a continuous tone. Like that. But because the British radar was tied into the national grid, it worked on a 25-second cycle. And so it went click, click, click. So as they went up along the coast, they kept hearing this click, click, click. And they first thought, what could this be? But they weren't familiar with that. That wasn't their radar, so then they determined it's the national grid. It's nothing more than they're hearing the power from the national grid. So they go all the way up the coastline, mapping and doing everything. The British let them go, and when they report back, they report to Goering that, hey, there is no radar in England. All they have is these towers, which are nothing more than directional finders. This was the big, if you want to talk about a foosball when it comes to intelligence, this was it. So at the start of the Battle of Britain, the Germans did not think the British had any type of an early warning system. This became crucial. Now, Goering was just opposite of Downing. Goering was a buffoon. He was a boisterous person who always made braggadocious claims. He said that he could destroy the RAF in 4 days. That's what he told him. He also said if any plane ever appeared over Germany, you could call me Meyer. Of course, behind his back he's called Meyer the rest of the war. But anyway, he was probably the best thing we had going for him as the Allies, was him in that place. The general that was over the forces at Normandy or at Dieppe was a guy named Albert Kessler. Now, he was an extremely competent general. He made his name in Italy building the defense as they went up the boot, but we're lucky he wasn't in charge, as Goering was. But they had started the war, or started the attack on England. It started really in May, and that's when they replaced Chamberlain with Churchill. And Churchill was, constant. He was obnoxious, he was hard-headed, but he was absolutely the person for the job. All right. So on May 10th, he gave his first speech when he said, I have nothing to offer but blood, sweat, toil, and tears. Probably all of you did. But he spoke for the common person. And he used the term never. We will never surrender. Right? And that became the big battle cry, if you will. And then on his next speech, he said, we will fight on the landing field. We will fight in the hills. We will fight in the streets. We shall never surrender. I'm sure you've all heard that. So it was a rallying cry for the people. He ordered that all the landing areas be mined and put up barbed wire. He also ordered that all the road signs be taken down, so that if any paratroopers land, they would not have any guides. He had all the water towers painted over. And then he formed the Home Guard. Now, what he asked for, he said, I need 150,000 volunteers from age 45 to 65 to man the Home Guard. And their job would have been to what? Watch for, basically do things that relieve the pressure off the regular army. Well, he didn't get 150,000, all right? He got 1 million. 1 million men stepped forward from the age, now England's not the biggest country in the world, so 1 million men stepping forward at age 45 to 65 is a big percentage of the population. They showed up with pitchforks, with hatchets. They showed up, a few had shotguns. They didn't have any kind of weaponry, but they trained in these small villages, these small hamlets. And I'm telling you, people ask me a lot of times when I'm doing this, I'll just get this question off. Says, do you think without Jane Holmes, the Germans could have conquered England? And the answer is going to be no. Could they have occupied it? The answer is yes. Conquered it? No. It would have been the biggest bloodbath in the history of the world. The government would have moved to either Iceland or probably more than likely Canada. They would have had covert activities. The Germans would have responded by wiping out whole villages. It would have been just a nightmare. But luckily, that never happened. And it never happened because of about 3,000 young men. All right? They were known as the few. Now, who were the few? All right? Now, these, Bull Halsey, who was an admiral, he made a statement one time, said, there are no great men. There's only great circumstances which ordinary men have to fulfill. I don't think I buy that. All right? Now, I guarantee you there's great circumstances. The Battle of Britain was one of them. But they're great men. And these 3,000, you're talking 3,000 people that saved the country. And these are 20-year-old men, okay? And so when they trained for about a year, they went into service. And so in early May, they started attacking, the Germans started attacking shipping in the canal. And so Hitler really didn't have any plans up until this point about even attacking England. But they got all the way to the end of France, and here there's England, so they think, well, we'll just take it too. And so that became Operation Sea Lion. That was what it was dubbed, Operation Sea Lion. But before they could do that, they had to take out the RAF. They could not put those slow-moving barges and ships going across there. With that, they would have lost thousands and thousands of troops. You think that the North Sea is not dangerous in the English Channel? Ask the Spanish. They lost the whole armada in there, okay? And if you've ever been on it, it's really rough water. And I don't think the German army understood how tough it would be to cross that. They thought it was a river crossing. Well, it's anything but that. All right? So they went up and down the coast. They took barges, cut the fronts of them out. Where the idea was that you take the troops across, they jump out on the beach, and then they, with short order, would conquer England. But the first thing that had to happen was that the RAF had to be taken out. And so in mid-May, they started attacking shipping. And Downing just told the merchant marines and people that would come out there, says, we're not going to help you. We're saving all our planes for the invasion. I mean, Downing saw the big picture better than probably anybody in England. He did not commit his forces. He wasn't lured out into battle over the English Channel, which is what the plan was. So, the historians point to July 10th as the start of the Battle of Britain. There was conflict before that, but this is in earnest. This is when Hitler says we're going to take this. This is when Operation Sea Lion was put into effect. So about the first 3 weeks, up until about August 1st, the battle was over the English Channel. And the Germans were losing pilots left and right over that channel. The RAF was more up to the task than anybody believed. The Spitfire had about 2,000 feet ceiling height advantage on the ME-109. And the Hurricane was not as fast as the 109, but it could turn quicker. It was more maneuverable. And it had a more stable platform for firing. That is, the guns were closer to the fuselage. And so between the two planes, the Hurricanes and the Spitfires, they were more than a match for the Germans, even though in fighters they were outnumbered 2-1. Total planes, the English were outnumbered 4-1. The English had about 690, 670, somewhere in that area, planes. The Germans over 4,000 at the start of the Battle of Britain. But they started losing them at a tremendous rate. So this prompted Goering to say, well, we're going to attack the mainland now. So on about August 1st, the first thing he did was start attacking those big towers. And for 3 days, they attacked the towers and the airfields. They knocked one of them out, and this turned out to be very fortuitous. They knocked one of those big towers down in southern England. They did not know, first, that they had radar, but then they did not know that they had mobile radar units. So the British ran a mobile radar unit in there, and within a matter of 2 hours, they were back sending out signals at 25 cycles a second. And so what Goering and especially Martini figured was, well, that can't be radar. We knocked the thing down and it's back online, so it must be a directional finder. So they went back. By this time, the Luftwaffe was trying to get the idea that maybe they had it because they're always waiting on us. But they assured them, no, they don't have it. They don't have any type of radar, any type of early warning. And this turned out to be their downfall. So about August 1st, for 3 days, they attacked the airfields, and then Goering's famous words, we're going to get back to the war. And this became the most dangerous time of the Battle of Britain. He attacked the RAF on the ground, the airfields, their supply lines, and he hit them hard. And it was relentless, day in and day out. Now, I want to tell you about this feud, okay? I want to tell you about these 3,000. These are young men. First of all, they're 20 years old. That's the average age, 20. They were, I guess I had this Hollywood notion of what an RAF driver was. I always thought he was Sean Connery or Richard Harris or somebody like that from the upper elite of the British class. Far from it. Out of the 3,000, only 200 had ever even been to college. They were farmers, they were factory workers, they were laborers, some were bankers, they were patriots, and they were brave young men. And they trained, and they did it for their homeland. They were fighting for their lives. And so, you know, I'm going to give you a little, we're going to do a little role play here. I'm going to give all of you in here a granddaughter, okay? Last night, your granddaughter come to stay all night with you. So you got up this morning, you say, boy, we're going to the War Museum, we're going to hear this big dynamic speaker off in Great Britain, and you want to come. And I know this, you know this is false. When she said, no, I don't want to go, I mean, you know that wouldn't be true. But she said, I'm going to stay home in my room. And you say, okay, so you're going to leave here a little bit, you're going to drive home. You pull into the driveway, there's no one around, but your house is on fire. All right, now I want to see your hands. How many of you are going to try to get your granddaughter out of that house? Not all of you. All right, now put your hands in. I'm going to ask this a little bit different. You're going to leave here, you're going to drive home. You're going to pull into that driveway, your house is on fire. How many of you are going to do whatever it takes to get your granddaughter out of that house? You see you see the difference? The German Luftwaffe was trying their best to win the Battle of Britain. The RAF was going to do whatever it takes. All right, you see the difference? Those houses being bombed down there, that's their homes. That's their grandparents. That's their mom and dads, their brothers and sisters. They were going to do whatever it takes. Now, you remember what Pope's fighters I talked to you about a little bit ago? A group of them made their way to England. And they formed the 303 Squadron, combat squadron. It became very significant at first because Downing wouldn't let them go into combat. They didn't speak English. Well, the one thing I've learned from studying this battle is that, trust me, as soon as they yell tally ho and they attack, all bets are off. There is no organization. It is every man for himself. It is life and death. And that's what it is, life and death. And so, because of the numbers of RAF fighters that were lost, on about August the 15th, Downing had to put them into service. From August 15th to about the 1st of May, the 303 Squadron shot down 126 German aircraft and lost 8. All right, so there's another thing you can add in there. Not only they were trying to protect their homeland, it's revenge. Now, these guys all knew what happened to their homeland when the Germans come through here. Remember when Bruce did the Holocaust, he talked about the Einsatzgruppen. Remember him talking about the killing squads? They went through his country and they went into the villages and they shot all the Jews, the gypsies, the political leaders, and anybody else that didn't like the looks of them. And they knew that. So this group of pilots, if you read the accounts, now they weren't suicidal, but they were reckless and abandoned. I mean, they would take chances that the normal person would never do. But the RAF was getting stretched almost to its limits. And by the Eagle Day, which was August 13th, was the biggest German push. And it was just, they just kept relentless, coming at it. And it got to the point where the RAF fighters and pilots were flying 2, 3, 4 combat missions a day. 4 times a day. You climbed into that plane, you went up there, and your life was on the line. And you think that doesn't start taking a toll on you. At breakfast that morning, you had all these guys that you've been living with for over a year. At supper that night, there was an empty chair there. One of them's gone. And it's kind of like Shakespeare wrote, those who spill blood with me in battle are forever my brother. We band of brothers. Remember that quote. And so, so the toll, not only physical, but mental, started just taking it to them. And you were sitting there at the table. Now, there's most of you have 6 people at the table. All right, now, look at this table you're sitting at and think, well, in the next 4 months, one of us are going to be dead. 2 of us are going to have catastrophic injuries. That'll leave 3 of you at a table with 6 that are unscathed. Which 3 of you is it going to be? Now, that's what they face every single day, these few, all right? It's amazing. I mean, what they went through. And they never, ever hesitated. There was bells outside where the saying was, ring the bell, run like hell. And they would jump in those fighters, and because of chain home, they had a 20-minute head start. They would get up to 22,000 feet, which is 2,000 feet higher than the Luftwaffe. The Hurricanes would take off next, and the Hurricanes' job was to intercept and come up into the middle of those bomber formations and spread them. And when they did that, then they would drop down onto them from above, and it was game on. And it's life and death. And every day he faced that. Every day, day in, day out, day in, day out. And then he got to the point that in September, in England, on September the 15th, is now still celebrated as Blitz Day. The Germans put their maximum effort out. And in that single day, the RAF shot down 46 German aircraft, and they lost 14 in one day. Now, that is a national holiday in Britain today, September the 15th. It's known as Britain Day. All right. And so what happened was because they were losing so many people that they changed their tactics again. Instead of attacking during the day, they started attacking at night. And this is what most of you know as the Blitz. where people with the sirens would go off, they would go down into the tube or into the subways, and they would spend the night there, and they could hear the rumbles. And I'm looking at the audience so I can tell that you guys know who Edward R. Murrow is. Now, if I was doing this to high school group, I wouldn't even bring this up. But Edward R. Murrow he had a group of reporters called Murrow's Boys. The two most famous were Eric Sevareid, who was in Cairo, and of course the most famous one was William Shirer in Berlin, wrote The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And so what he would do, he would sit on top of the BBC building, him and his engineer, where everybody else is down in the subways, and he did a play-by-play. I've listened to these broadcasts. And he would watch this thing, and he would talk about planes falling out of the air, and you'd hear bombs dropping in the distance, you'd hear sirens going off. And he and his engineers sit there, and then they'd send it back to New York. New York then would put it out over the air 2 or 3 days later. And Americans, what this did, it started swaying America's thoughts towards the war. America was totally isolationist up to then. They didn't want any part of that European war. But, you know, it allowed Roosevelt to get Lend-Lease pushed through. Now, you probably remember here in the state where Roosevelt says, if your neighbor's house was on fire, would you not loan him a hose? I mean, that was the propaganda you used, but it's the truth. And so it allowed him in March to pass Lend-Lease. But long before Lend-Lease was going on, there was some covert stuff done to get them supplies. But the point is, the British were on their own. And these people, these 3,000, all they could do was day in and day out go up there and meet that challenge. Well, they started wearing down the Luftwaffe. And so pretty soon, Hitler started losing interest in this. After all, his big thing was always been to go to the east, and that would be Russia. And Operation Barbarossa was still on the books, and that was going to start the following spring. So they say the end of the Battle of Britain was October 31st. It went from July 10th to October 31st. It didn't just end, okay? It kind of faded away. And so, in other words, they started taking units from France, switching them over to the east, out towards Russia, and it was just kind of a pull down, if you will, until about the 1st of March. And then it really did stop. But from about the middle of September till May, that's when they bombed London and all of Covington and all the cities, and that's where basically we most of us think of the Blitz. The Battle of Britain started many months before that, and then many months after. But that period of time is when the people took to shelter. If you ever go to the Imperial War Museum in London, they have in the back, there's a place where you go, and it's a simulator. And you sit in there, and you think you're in an underground shelter, and you can hear in the distance the sirens go off. And then you start feeling the rumble, and it gets louder and louder, and then dust comes down from the ceiling. And it is very realistic. And then afterwards, they blow a siren, and you're allowed to leave. And when you leave, you exit into what would be a street in London, and it's been bombed out. And in typical British humor, in a very, very Cockney accent, the man tells the wife, dig through the rubble and find our tea tin. And she says, well, I was saving that for an emergency. You know, so. But anyway, it's very realistic. And I just happened to be, when I was there, sitting next to an elderly lady who lived through the Blitz. And so she gave me a lot of insight on that, just what that was like. She said my mom would bring down bread and butter, and we would sit there and we would sing. You know, and the kids would play, and they'd just try to distract from the noise. But she said the horror was that when you walked up out of there, was your house still going to be there? You know, that was the Battle of Britain. That was the Battle of the Blitz, okay? And so, again, this lecture's usually an hour and a half long, and I'm doing it in 30 minutes here. But I've skipped over a lot, trust me. But it ended up, the RAF lost about over 1,000 pilots, all right? But the Germans lost over 4,000. So that's give you the percentages. And so I'll just end with what Churchill said, never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few.
First question is, tell us about night blindness and how they dealt with that.
Well, night blindness is simply that. You know, you have a hard time you go up into the night, and what happens is we have these spotlights, and the Germans had more night fighters than we did because they put these great big spotlights on us. And what would happen to the Germans, the bombers, it would light up the cockpit, and they couldn't see what they were going to drop their bombs on. And so what started really Hitler bombing London in earnest was that the pilots got lost, dropped these bombs over London, and so the next night to retaliate, that's when the RAF bombed Berlin, and then it was all home, game on. Hitler ordered the bombing of London every night after that. So night blindness was brought on by big spotlights that were hit in the lights, into the cabins. But, it was going to end up that way anyway. The Battle of Britain was always going to end up with the bombing of the cities. I don't think that was ever going to happen. But that's when they bombed Berlin, that's when Goering said, "You can call me Meyer." Fish for the rest of the war behind his back people did. Anybody else?
Yeah, another question, you got a question. Night blindness, so also the pilots would stay in a dark room and they wear rare glasses because your rods and cones take about 20 minutes to change to see at night. And when we first started taking them on, we were blind for 20 minutes. That night blindness was 20 minutes, you didn't know where you were. And then we learned to wear the goggles and be in the dark when we're waiting around for them to bomb us. And the British caught on to that pretty quick. But at first, they were going up there, couldn't see anything, and the Germans had been coming over the ocean, and they've been in the dark for 3 or 4, an hour or two, and they had already accommodated for that. So a lot of pilots know that. Even to pilots today, the bright lights change things. Name?
Greg Hogger. You talked about doubting. You talked about doubting and his foresight. Wasn't it true halfway through the Battle of France, he was actually pulling the Spitfires and Hurricanes off the continent?
What he did, they kept requesting him. He would only send 2 squadrons. Now they kept begging for more and more, and he didn't pull that 2 out, but they lost that 2. But he would not send any more over there, and so basically the French and the British kept, we need more planes. He just wouldn't do it. He just dug in his heels and he said, look, England's going to be saved by these fighter pilots, and I'm saving them. And he did. He refused to send them. And there was a lot of hard feelings over that too, trust me.
That's what I thought. I know the Germans trying to catch everything on the ground in Poland and France.
Yeah, he sent 2 fighter squadrons over, but he refused to send any more.
Yeah, Jason, one of the things that I read was that the British developed a minimum amount of squadrons they needed to defend, which was, I think, like 26 or 27.
53.
And once it got down to that number, they wouldn't send any more, because they were just getting chewed up over in France.
Yeah, Downing said he needed 53 to basically protect the continent, or to protect the island. And so, he did get 53, by the way. You're right, 26 was the bare bones minimum. But that he didn't think he could actually hold them off with that. So they did get 53. So, but they continued. We had just a local historian here. These planes were flown from here to the East Coast by young ladies. I bet most of you knew that. There were ladies who did the same thing that delivered the Spitfires and Hurricanes. One particular lady flew 1,000 planes to the front. 1,000. So if she wasn't doing that, that meant an RAF pilot had to do that. So it was a total effort. And the term never, you got to realize that when Churchill stood for everything. He said that he was the face of resistance. Is really what it was. And he was absolutely the right person at the right time for that. Yeah. Well, it was that way first, but yeah. So, anybody else?
How many of those 3,000 survived the war?
Well, over 1,000 died, most of them. Now, none of them are alive. The last I had tracked, there was one still living in 2017. His name was Patty. If you hadn't asked me, I'd probably think his last name. His first name's Patty. And he was the last pilot that fought in the Battle of Britain that was still alive, and that was 2017. I don't know it, he's gone, but I highly suspect he's gone by now. So there is nobody left in the Battle of Britain. Oh, by the end of the war, there was several. I don't know the exact number, but 1,000 was killed during.
In regards, but Mike, just 1 second. In regards to that, Norman, Bob Cleveland is one of our pilots here that does simulation for children and even adults. But he was stationed in England in 1979. He went to the RAF reunions 2 different times and gave us a book signed by all the RAF pilots that went to that reunion. And he said it was so nostalgic. These brave guys from 1940s all showed up at that reunion. So we have a book signed by them, but pretty dynamic. Sorry, go Mike.
Just to add to about the pilots, the last man was died in 2018.
Is that what it was? Yeah, I knew at 17 he was alive.
Yeah,
so I
and
didn't know that.
Netflix, if you get a chance, has a fantastic storyline on the Battle of Britain. And it also thanks, there was 50 Americans that
Yeah.
volunteered
Yeah. Eagles
under no
won.
pay to go train and fight. And they fought they fought against the Germans, and none of them had ever flown a Spitfire or Hurricane. They were used to flying P-40s, which was a completely different airplane. And it took them just something like a week, and they were very formidable with no pay.
I don't know
50
where most
Americans.
of you saw that movie, The Darkest Hours. Did you guys see that about Churchill? In that, they even referenced this. I went to college in Montana, and I thought it was urban legend about this. If you ever go to northeast Montana, even today, you get out there east of Sydney or west of Sydney, out there around Medicine Lake, you can drive around for a day and never see another human being. But in 1937, 38, 39, that era, there was no one up there. So Churchill, in order to help them out, this was all clandestines, he flew in a squadron of P-40s, or had flown in there. They landed in a field right on the border between Montana and Canada. The Canadians hid in the woods so they couldn't be seen until the Americans left. And so they'd have total deniability. Then the Canadians came out, they drug the planes across into Canada, and then they flew them and brought them to England. You know, that actually, when I first heard that, I thought that was urban, this is back in the 70s, I thought that was an urban legend. But I had the history professors tell me that actually did happen. It was classified till 1972. That was a squadron, so that would probably be 12 to 14. Yeah.
Over here.
Were there any American pilots that volunteered to go over and help?
Yeah.
Us to
They were called the Eagle Squadron. Yeah, there was. And Doc said that he thought there were around 50 of them. Yes, there was. Yeah, they were.
Another thought I had, because I'm thinking in terms of why Evansville was so important in our war effort, the Spitfire being so important to theirs. Where were the factories for those?
They were not just a single factory, but their assembly factory was just north of London. But they were parts were manufactured all over, brought to north of London, and that's where they assembled. But you know, I can't tell you exactly where, but it was just north. It was near the London proper, and it was quite an effort. Now, the Spitfire took longer to get in production, but I read this account. The pilots say to fly the Spitfire in the air, it was an angel, but on the ground, it was the devil. It had a real narrow undercarriage, and it was very, very difficult to land. A lot of them during practice, a lot of bent props. It was hard to land. The Hurricane was much easier to fly. It was more maneuverable. It didn't have the speed or the ceiling. But again, the guns were closer to the fuselage, so you had a more stable platform. It was more accurate shooting, whereas on the wings, on the Spitfire, the guns were out here. Well, you know how when you fly, your wings go up and down, so that would hurt their accuracy. But, you know, they were both built in the same area. Mitchell was the guy that invented or designed the Spitfire.
I was thinking a lot of parts were made in Southampton, which is a real narrow
Yeah,
channel.
that's
and
true.
Then, so they moved a lot of it further in, and
Yeah.
Evansville was way inland, and that's why we were valuable.
Well, you couldn't get too far into England, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, so that's exactly right.
Up that same alley though, can you speak to this, Jason, about Hitler tried to hit the city, but why didn't they go after the factories? Because we went after his factories, we were bombing, but he didn't strike the factories, which is what he should have done.
Well, what he did after the onslaught onto the airfields is when they changed tactics, they started hitting the estuaries just south of London, and that's where the warehouse district was. And this caused a lot of problems for the British government because that was the poor part of town. There weren't any subways, all the buildings were open. And so the Luftwaffe was attacking these warehouses and these basically on the Thames where they bring in supplies. And what they would say, the rich people are being, are not taking the brunt of this war, we're taking it. But luckily, I don't know if that luckily is the right word, they happened to drop bombs that fell near Buckingham Palace and on St. Andrew's Cathedral. And then from that point on, everybody was in the war. But for the first few weeks there, what you're talking about, when they were bombing that district south of town, the estuaries, and that's where the oil tanks were, the poor people lived in that area, and they thought they were basically taking the brunt of the war. And they were for about 2 to 3 weeks. You got to realize the whole thing's not all that long. This is not a long period of time. It's a short period of time as far as the whole war goes. But it was very intense. And again, I go back to those pilots, those young men. It's just amazing to me what where do you get guys like that? I don't know. Maybe they're out there right now. I don't know. But they certainly. You're talking 3,000 people that saved millions of people in Great Britain, and that's what it came down to. It was these 3,000 saved them, and that network, that Watts network, which fed into fighter command. So they, you could sit on the ground and wait for the Germans. You had last minute. You didn't have to spend time up in the air, and that saved pilots, saved planes. So that was huge. And the Germans never did figure out that we had radar. That they had radar. Never did. Didn't know until after the war was over. So it's one of the great espionage things. They sent out false stuff that it was direction finders, and then again that ill-fated balloon, Zeppelin trip, which played right into it.
Towers left?
No, they're all gone. Yeah, they're all gone. Yeah.
The Spitfire got all the glory. Hurricane did. We have the same thing here. The P-51 got all the glory, the P-47 was work hard.
Yeah.
They didn't.
Well, what was the?
Can you repeat that? Yeah.
Well, what he said was that, and it's true, the Spitfire was kind of the golden child, got the glory, whereas the Hurricanes was a workhorse. There were more of those, and didn't get quite the name. Now, they were respected, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of like here with the P-47 and the P-51 Mustang. The same we do when us, the docents, when we take people around. The Spitfire pilots got all the girls. But the P-47 pilots got home to their girls, okay? And that's true. I mean, that's a rugged aircraft. And that's what we always say that when we're doing tours. But you're right, you made a very good point. The Mustang is and it was rightly so, it was a tremendous aircraft. But, yeah, it had a Merlin Rolls-Royce engine, yeah, that's exactly what it had. Yeah.
But what Norman, to that point though, if you look, we just went to an educational session in New Orleans, and the lead docent there talked to us about the P-47 versus the P-51, and the statistics are unbelievable. It was about that P-47 there did about 3 times the damage that the P-51 did, and people don't even realize that. So that was the real workhorse, and there were better pilots against the P-47 because we got rid of a lot of their good German pilots before. But it triples the statistics of the P-51. And people don't even know what the P-47 is.
No, I never heard of it.
Go ahead, Larry. Just go ahead, Larry, I agree.
Can you hear me?
No, just turn it on.
I think that's better. A gentleman by the name of Basil Thompson was planning to come to this when we had the original day. He belonged to the sports car club here in Evansville. That's where I met him. He told me that during the Battle of Britain, he and his friend Millard would get a banana and maybe a sandwich in their bicycle. They were young teenagers, and ride off to a hill and watch the Battle of Britain above them and cheer when the German planes went into the water.
Yeah.
So he experienced this firsthand. Maybe he'll come and we can ask him some
Yeah, that'd be
questions.
good. My brother's wife's mother was a war bride. Her father was killed in the war and during the Battle of Britain, and he always wondered, you stay away from those Americans. Of course, she ended up marrying one to come back here, but anyway. She said that they would count the planes going over and count them coming back to see how many were shot down. She told me that before she passed. But I'll give you one more thing about the Battle of Britain that I should have mentioned that was a advantage for us too. First of all, if you were shot down over England and you were an RAF pilot, you were scooped up and taken back to your base. If you were a Luftwaffe pilot, you went to prison camp. But the Luftwaffe of the planes, the ME-109 could only stay over England for around 30 minutes max. It had a very small fuel capacity. So they would have to break off in the middle of a lot of dogfights and start for home. And there's accounts along the shoreline of France of all the wrecked planes that just didn't quite make it back, that had crashed. So that was a big advantage we had, is because they had a very, very small fuel tanks on the ME-109s. I'll tell you a humorous story. This is, I know we got to get out, you guys got to leave, but there was one of those Polish pilots who was shot down in England. He landed, and one of the home guard come out there with a pitchfork, and he was going to make sure that he was going to run him through with that pitchfork. Well, the pilot carried a 45, but he wasn't going to shoot this old farmer. So he got out of his parachute trying to tell him that he was one of the good guys, but he spoke Polish. And the guy didn't know the difference between Polish and German. He just knew the guy didn't speak English. And he was chasing him across the field, and the guy just trying to stay ahead of that pitchfork, trying to explain to him that he was one of the good guys, and that guy trying to shish kebab him with a pitchfork. Luckily for the pilot, an army truck pulled up and saved the day, so to speak, and then they became best friends. He's still pilot, but anyway, he was trying to run him through with a pitchfork. I could just see him running across the field, and that guy, that old man. Yeah, he was, but yeah, the home guard was, like I said, over 1 million people. Just think of that, 1 million people volunteered. And a lot of them, they walked there with canes, but it didn't make any difference. It was, they were gonna fight. There was no doubt in my mind that, like I said, I think they would have conquered it. I think they would have overran it, but I don't ever see them conquer it. I really don't. I think they would have fought I think the espionage and the sabotage and everything that would have went on in that country would have been brutal. It would have made France look like a piece of cake. So, oh, he was. You know what happened to Churchill 3 months after the war ended? Yeah, they threw him out of office. Now think of that. There's thank you for you. So, yeah, that's true. Dowdy, the air minister, Dowdy, lost his job 30 days after the end of the Battle of Britain. Now think of that, because he didn't have any personnel.
I got one other thing about the P-47 and the P-51. The P-47 in aerial combat knocked down more airplanes, more ME-109s and 110s than any other airplane alive, created the highest scoring ace in the history of the war in Europe, and also the airplane took out more railroads, everything that you could possibly name. But the 51, which was a great airplane, got all of the
What Doc said, they didn't.
And people don't realize that plane was absolutely. In fact, the Germans didn't like it. They didn't mind the 51 because they could handle with it at 15,000 feet. But when they seen that big raptor coming down at them from above, they know, oh my God, here we go.
Did you know the Germans had a fighter pilot named Hartmann that shot down 350 planes? Now we talk about a fighter, he's having 5. He shot down 350. Most of them were Russian. So
Most of those Russians were on land sitting too.
anybody? All right, well, thank you very much.
Jason, I'd hate to see if you had some time to prepare. He had 15 minutes to prepare. If he had time to prepare, my God, what would he have done? Jason, we're going to give you a little bit more time next time. Yes, ma'am. He won't do it again. We'll squeeze him in next year. We'll squeeze him in again. We videoed it up there, so we got it. But next week, or 2 weeks, it's going to be a lady named Donna Bowman. She's going to talk about the factories that helped build Evansville. And then 2 weeks after that, she's going to talk about the WASPs, those women that flew, the ferry pilots. Then we're going to have propaganda World War II by Bruce Creed. Now we got to fill up Jason with another talker, so we'll do that about 4 weeks from now. Get your friends to come. Tomorrow or Friday morning, we're having 56 kids from age 18 to 17 get in planes and fly around here for zero cost. It's called Young Eagles. We did it in October. There's been 2.2 million kids flown for free. So if you want to come out and watch that, it'd be a nice time to encourage them to be pilots and learn more about the air. Thank you for coming today.